I'll never forget the look on my father's face when he realized that the vendor he desperately needed was now owned by me, the son he had just thrown out of the company. "You don't do anything except get a salary for free, so you can go," he had told me. Little did he know that while building his company to $500 million, I had been making strategic moves of my own. Before I dive into this wild business roller coaster, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy stories about strategic comebacks and family business drama, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life business lessons. Trust me, what happened next in this story might teach you something that could save your career one day. The Harrison name had been synonymous with manufacturing excellence in our small industrial town since before I was born. My father, Lawrence Harrison, founded Harrison Manufacturing in 1975 with nothing but a small loan and an unrelenting work ethic. By the time I came along in 1985, the company was a modest success, employing about 50 people and generating enough revenue to provide our family with a comfortable life. My earliest memories involve weekend visits to the factory floor, where Dad would parade me around like a prized possession. "Maxwell," he would say, his hand heavy on my small shoulder, "this will all be yours someday." It wasn't a question or even an offer. It was a declaration, a destiny predetermined before I could form my own dreams. The factory smelled of metal and ambition, a scent that seeped into my clothes and followed me home. Our dinner conversations revolved around supplier issues, employee problems, and market fluctuations. While other kids' fathers told bedtime stories about dragons and heroes, mine recounted tales of business negotiations and competitive victories. My mother, Catherine, was a gentle counterbalance to Dad's intensity. A former literature professor who gave up her career when I was born, she tried to introduce art, music, and philosophy into my childhood. "Business isn't everything, Maxwell," she would whisper when Dad wasn't around. But even she knew that in the Harrison household, business was indeed everything. My sister Jessica was 3 years younger and far braver than I ever was. When she announced at 16 that she wanted to become a doctor instead of joining the family business, the ensuing argument shook the foundation of our home. Dad didn't speak to her for weeks. I still remember her tears and determination, a combination that eventually won her freedom but created a permanent rift in the family. I took the path of least resistance. I excelled in math and economics in high school, then attended my father's alma mater for a business degree. Every summer, I interned at Harrison Manufacturing, learning the operations from shipping to accounting. Dad never praised my work directly, but I occasionally caught glimpses of pride when he thought I wasn't looking. By my senior year of college, I had developed my own vision for Harrison Manufacturing. The company was stuck in the past, producing the same industrial components it had for decades, while more innovative competitors were gaining market share. Our technology was outdated, our marketing non-existent, and our management structure a relic of the 1970s. The company was worth perhaps $10 million on paper, but its potential was being squandered. When I tried to discuss modernization with Dad during holiday breaks, he would dismiss my ideas as textbook nonsense. "Real business happens on the factory floor, not in classrooms," he would say, pouring himself another scotch. "When you've worked as many years as I have, then you can suggest changes." What Dad failed to realize was that the business world had evolved dramatically since he founded the company. Global supply chains, digital technology, and modern management practices had transformed manufacturing. Harrison Manufacturing was a dinosaur, and dinosaurs didn't fare well in changing environments. I graduated with honors and a comprehensive business plan for transforming Harrison Manufacturing hidden in my laptop. Dad hadn't asked to see it, and I hadn't offered. But as I prepared to join the company full-time, I knew that the plan would either save the family legacy or destroy my relationship with my father. Possibly both. When I walked through the factory doors on my first official day, I wasn't Maxwell Harrison, the son of the founder. I was just Maxwell, the new college graduate with something to prove. And prove it I would, though not in the way anyone, least of all my father, expected. My first day at Harrison Manufacturing set the tone for the next several years. Dad called an all-hands meeting and introduced me not as his son but as our newest employee who will be starting at the bottom like everyone else. The embarrassment was precisely the point. No special treatment, he announced, looking directly at me. The Harrison name doesn't guarantee success here. The employees, many of whom had known me since I was a child, averted their eyes. Some looked sympathetic, others curious to see if I would survive my father's trial by fire. I straightened my tie and nodded respectfully, determined not to show weakness. For the next 6 months, I rotated through every department. I packed boxes in shipping, operated machinery on the factory floor, entered data in accounting, and cold-called potential clients in sales. The hours were long, the work often tedious, but I absorbed everything, identifying inefficiencies and outdated processes along the way. It was during my time in product development that I met Grace Parker, a brilliant middle manager who had been with the company for 15 years. Unlike most employees who treated me with cautious formality, Grace spoke frankly. "Your father built this place with grit and instinct," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "But the industry has changed, and Harrison Manufacturing hasn't. We're losing market share every quarter. If something doesn't change soon, we'll be obsolete within 5 years." I finished her sentence. I know. Grace became my first ally, providing insights into company operations that weren't in any official documents. She introduced me to other forward-thinking employees who recognized the need for change, but lacked the authority to implement it. Meanwhile, I was developing a relationship with Amanda Reynolds, a marketing executive I'd met during my final year of college. While not involved in our business, her outside perspective proved invaluable. Many nights, she would listen patiently as I outlined my vision for Harrison Manufacturing, offering encouragement when Dad's latest criticism had left me questioning my capabilities. "He's afraid," Amanda said one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment. "Your ideas threaten everything he's built, not because they're wrong, but because they suggest he's been wrong." 6 months into my employment, I saw an opportunity. A major client was considering switching to a competitor offering more innovative components. I prepared a detailed proposal for modifying our product to better meet their needs, complete with cost analyses and implementation timelines. Dad barely glanced at it during the management meeting. "We've been making this component the same way for 20 years, he declared. "If it's not broken, don't fix it." I should have stayed quiet. Instead, I replied, "It is broken, Dad. That's why we're losing the account." The room fell silent. Dad's face reddened, but before he could respond, Noah Williams, a senior board member who rarely spoke during operational meetings, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should consider Maxwell's proposal," he suggested mildly. "The numbers look solid." To everyone's surprise, Dad agreed to let me lead a small team to implement my modifications, though his parting words made his expectations clear. "When this fails, we'll go back to doing things my way." It didn't fail. The client not only stayed, but increased their order. It was a small victory, but it earned me a modicum of respect among the staff and management. Dad promoted me to department head, though he was careful to frame it as a standard progression rather than recognition of my success. Over the next year, I gradually implemented changes within my department, careful not to overreach my authority. Productivity improved, costs decreased, and employee satisfaction rose. Other department heads began consulting me privately, implementing similar changes in their areas. Dad watched with growing unease as my influence spread. During a particularly tense executive meeting, he accused me of creating a shadow organization within his company. The accusation wasn't entirely unfair. I had indeed formed a network of like-minded employees who shared my vision for modernization. "I'm trying to help the company evolve, Dad," I said after the meeting. "By undermining my leadership," he countered. "This company survived for 30 years without your help. Remember that." The confrontation made one thing clear. Incremental change wouldn't be enough. If Harrison Manufacturing was going to transform, I needed more authority and a strategic advantage that even Dad couldn't ignore. That's when I began developing my comprehensive transformation plan and investigating the company's supply chain vulnerabilities. What I discovered about our relationship with Bennett Supply would change everything, though neither Dad nor I could have predicted how completely. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came unexpectedly. Harrison Manufacturing had been producing the same line of industrial components for decades, but a new technology was disrupting the market. Our largest competitor had just unveiled a prototype that threatened to make our primary product line obsolete. I spent weeks researching the technology, analyzing market trends, and developing a strategy that would not just respond to the threat but position Harrison Manufacturing at the forefront of the industry. The plan required significant investment and a complete retooling of our production facilities, but the potential return was enormous. When I presented my findings to Dad privately, his response was predictable. "Too risky," he declared, barely looking at the detailed projections. "We stick with what we know." "What we know is becoming obsolete," I argued. "This isn't about risk, it's about survival." The argument escalated until Dad slammed his fist on the desk. "Enough. I'm still CEO of this company, and I say no." Rather than continuing a losing battle, I requested time to present my proposal to the full board. Dad reluctantly agreed, likely believing the conservative board members would side with him. The night before the presentation, I received a call from Noah Williams, the board member who had supported my first small initiative. "Lawrence has been calling board members," Noah warned me. "He's trying to kill your proposal before you even present it." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I've watched you work for the past 2 years," Noah replied. "You care about this company's future more than your father realizes. Don't let him sabotage you tomorrow." The board meeting was tense. Dad introduced my presentation with thinly veiled skepticism, emphasizing the speculative nature of my proposal. When I stood to speak, I felt every eye in the room evaluating not just my ideas, but my worthiness as Lawrence Harrison's son. For 90 minutes, I outlined the market shift, presented competitive analyses, and detailed my strategy for pivoting Harrison Manufacturing toward the emerging technology. I addressed potential risks and implementation challenges, concluding with a phased approach that would minimize disruption while maximizing opportunities. The questions were pointed, sometimes hostile, but I was prepared. By the meeting's end, even Dad's strongest allies on the board seemed intrigued by the potential. When the vote came, my proposal passed with a slim majority. Dad's expression was unreadable as he adjourned the meeting. He didn't speak to me for days afterward. Implementing the strategy proved even more challenging than winning approval. Dad undermined my authority at every turn, questioning decisions in front of staff and withholding resources needed for critical phases. I worked 16-hour days, troubleshooting problems and rallying the team despite Dad's resistance. It was during this period that I discovered something crucial about our supply chain. Harrison Manufacturing relied heavily on a single vendor, Bennett Supply, for specialized components essential to our production process. Bennett provided nearly 60% of our raw materials, and their proprietary alloys were integral to our product's quality. I arranged a meeting with Martin Bennett, the aging owner, ostensibly to negotiate better terms. What I discovered changed my strategic thinking entirely. "I'm looking to retire in the next year or two," Martin confided over lunch. "My children have no interest in the business. I'll likely sell to the highest bidder." The implications were serious. If a competitor acquired Bennett Supply, they could cripple Harrison Manufacturing by controlling our supply chain or raising prices beyond sustainability. "Would you consider selling to us?" I asked. Martin shook his head. "Lawrence and I discussed it years ago. He wasn't interested then, said he didn't want the headache of managing a supplier." That night, I called Amanda and shared my concerns. If someone else buys Bennett Supply, everything we're building could be at risk. "So, why don't you buy it?" she suggested simply. The idea seemed absurd initially. I had savings from my salary and a small inheritance from my grandfather, but nowhere near enough to purchase a company like Bennett Supply. Yet the more I considered it, the more strategic it seemed. I approached several banks with a business plan for acquiring Bennett Supply as a private investment. With my credentials and Bennett's stable financial history, I secured financing for 70% of the purchase price, using my personal assets as collateral for the down payment. To maintain secrecy, I established a holding company, MSH Ventures, named after my initials. Over the next 3 months, I negotiated terms with Martin while continuing to implement my transformation strategy at Harrison Manufacturing. The day I signed the preliminary purchase agreement for Bennett Supply was also the day Harrison Manufacturing won its first major contract under my new strategy. The company's revenue had already begun to climb, and projections suggested exponential growth if we continued on course. Dad, seeing the early success, began taking credit for the transformation in public while continuing to criticize my decisions in private. Lucky timing, he would say, dismissing the strategic shift that was revitalizing the company. Anyone could have seen that opportunity. I didn't argue. With my position at Harrison Manufacturing strengthening and my secret acquisition of Bennett Supply proceeding, I was playing a longer game than Dad realized. The real transformation was just beginning. 5 years passed in a blur of 18-hour workdays, international flights, and relentless expansion. Under my operational leadership, Harrison Manufacturing transformed from a stagnant regional producer to an industry innovator. Our valuation soared from $30 million to over $250 million, making us one of the fastest-growing manufacturers in our sector. Dad had reluctantly promoted me to Chief Operating Officer while retaining the CEO title for himself. In practice, I ran most of the company's operations while he focused on external relationships and his role as the company's founder and figurehead. The arrangement worked, though tensions simmered beneath the surface. Our growth strategy proceeded along multiple fronts. We established our first European office in Munich, giving us access to the lucrative German industrial market. Our R&D department, revitalized with new talent and resources, developed proprietary technology that revolutionized our core products' efficiency and durability. We acquired 3 struggling competitors, integrating their client bases and salvaging their best assets while discarding outdated systems. I implemented cutting-edge manufacturing processes that reduced waste by 40% and increased production capacity by 65%. Meanwhile, Bennett Supply flourished under my quiet ownership. I had retained Martin as a consultant during the transition, and he helped me understand the nuances of the materials business. I expanded Bennett's client base beyond Harrison Manufacturing while ensuring our company received preferential treatment, creating a strategic advantage no competitor could match. My personal life evolved alongside the business. Amanda and I married in a small ceremony that Dad nearly missed due to a business emergency that couldn't wait. A year later, our daughter Lily was born. My time at home became precious and rare, a fact that caused increasing friction in my marriage. "You're building an empire for a family you never see," Amanda observed one night after I missed Lily's bath time for the 3rd consecutive evening. She was right, but I was caught in the momentum of creation. Harrison Manufacturing had become the company I had envisioned in college, and I couldn't step back now, not when we were achieving everything I had dreamed of. At work, subtle shifts in the power dynamic began to emerge. Board members increasingly deferred to my judgment on strategic matters. Industry publications featured me in articles about innovative leadership. Employees loyal to Dad's old methods retired or transferred to less critical roles. Dad watched these changes with growing resentment. His drinking, always a concern, worsened. He would arrive late to important meetings, sometimes with alcohol on his breath. Several times, I had to smooth over situations where he had berated employees or made inappropriate comments to clients. Then came the hiring of Samuel Foster, an old friend of Dad's from his early business days. Dad installed him as a special advisor to the CEO without consulting me or the executive team. "Samuel brings decades of experience," Dad announced at the executive meeting. "He'll be working closely with me on strategic initiatives." The message was clear. Samuel was being positioned as a counterweight to my influence. Over the following months, he questioned my decisions, requested access to confidential information, and held private meetings with Dad and selected board members. Through Grace, who had been promoted to vice president of operations, I learned that Samuel was actually being groomed as my replacement. Dad and Samuel had been constructing a narrative that I had overreached, taken too many risks, and needed experienced oversight. "They're building a case to sideline you," Grace warned during a discreet lunch away from the office. Lawrence wants someone who will follow his vision, not challenge it. I consulted Diana Harris, our legal counsel, and someone I trusted implicitly. What are my options if they try to remove me? I asked. Diana's assessment was blunt. Your employment contract gives you some protection, but if the board sides with Lawrence, they could realistically demote or terminate you with a suitable severance package. That night, I reviewed my position from all angles. I was essential to the company's operations, but not irreplaceable if Dad was determined enough. However, I held an ace that no one knew about: Bennett Supply, now a crucial vendor that provided customized components for our most successful product lines. I increased my involvement with Bennett Supply, ensuring that our relationship with Harrison Manufacturing became even more specialized and integral. I also began documenting every successful initiative I had led and maintaining detailed records of the company's transformation under my leadership. The company continued its meteoric rise, approaching the $500 million valuation mark that had once seemed impossible. But as we neared this milestone, I sensed that the confrontation with Dad was becoming inevitable. He could not accept that his son had succeeded where he had plateaued, and his pride would not allow him to acknowledge the transformation I had engineered. I prepared for the worst while hoping for reconciliation. But in the Harrison family business, hope had always been a poor strategic choice. The day Harrison Manufacturing officially reached a $500 million valuation should have been the proudest moment of my professional life. The company organized an elaborate celebration at the Grand Meridian Hotel, complete with champagne towers, celebrity entertainment, and industry recognition. Everyone who was anyone in our business sector attended, eager to associate with the success story we had become. Dad was in his element, working the room in his custom tuxedo, accepting congratulations as if the company's transformation had been his vision all along. I stood on the periphery, gratified by the success, but increasingly aware of the whispers and sidelong glances between Dad and Samuel. Midway through the evening, I stepped onto a balcony for some air and overheard their conversation in the adjacent smoking area. The board meeting is set for Monday, Samuel was saying. We have the votes. Maxwell won't know what hit him. Dad's response chilled me. Make sure the transition is clean. I want him out by the end of the day. I retreated silently, mind racing. Monday was only 3 days away. Whatever they had planned was imminent, and I was unprepared. The emergency board meeting notification arrived in my email the next morning, citing urgent strategic matters as the agenda. I called Noah immediately. Do you know what this is about? I asked without preamble. Noah's hesitation told me everything. Lawrence has been working on this for months, Maxwell. He's compiled a file alleging mismanagement, excessive risk-taking, and even suggested improprieties in some acquisitions. None of that is true, I protested. I know, Noah sighed. But he has Samuel and 3 other board members convinced. They've been meeting privately for weeks. I spent the weekend preparing my defense and considering contingencies. Amanda suggested fighting publicly, taking the story to industry media. Your track record speaks for itself, she argued. No one will believe you've mismanaged a company you've grown exponentially. But I knew Dad better than that. He wouldn't have called the meeting without ensuring his victory. This wasn't about facts or performance. It was about control and his inability to accept that his son had succeeded beyond his achievements. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitable confrontation. The boardroom was unusually full. In addition to the regular members, Samuel sat beside Dad, a thick folder in front of him. Diana Harris, our legal counsel, looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze when I entered. Dad called the meeting to order with practiced authority. We're here to address serious concerns about the company's current management direction, he began, his voice steady. Samuel has prepared a comprehensive analysis that requires immediate board action. For the next 40 minutes, Samuel presented a distorted version of my 5-year leadership. Using selectively chosen data and out-of-context decisions, he painted a picture of reckless expansion, unnecessary risk, and questionable judgment. The acquisition of our competitors was framed as overpriced and impulsive. The European expansion was characterized as premature and draining resources. Most disturbing was the implication that I had somehow personally benefited from certain vendor relationships, with vague references to preferential treatment and undisclosed arrangements. The insinuation was clear. I had compromised the company for personal gain. When Samuel finished, several board members appeared genuinely concerned. Dad thanked him for his thorough investigation and turned to me with a practiced look of regret. Maxwell, these findings are deeply troubling. Before the board votes on the appropriate action, would you like to respond? The trap was perfectly set. A detailed defense would seem desperate. Righteous indignation would appear guilty. I needed to remain calm and strategic. The company's performance speaks for itself, I began. A $500 million valuation doesn't result from mismanagement. Every decision questioned in this presentation was approved by this board, including you, Dad. I addressed the specific allegations concisely, highlighting the actual returns on the acquisitions and the European market's growing contribution to our bottom line. When I reached the insinuations about vendor relationships, I paused. As for the suggestion of impropriety with vendors, that's not only false, but potentially defamatory. I've always acted in the company's best interests, as our results clearly demonstrate. Noah and two other board members nodded in agreement, but the majority seemed unmoved. Dad had done his work well. The board needs to vote on a motion, Dad announced, not acknowledging my defense. Given the serious nature of these findings, I propose that Maxwell be removed from his position as COO effective immediately, with appropriate severance as outlined in his contract. The betrayal, though expected, still stung. This was my father, the man who had once promised me the company would be mine someday, now publicly discarding me based on manufactured concerns. Noah attempted to delay the vote, suggesting an independent investigation, but was overruled. When the votes were tallied, the result was 7-4 in favor of termination. I was out. Dad delivered the final blow with cold precision. "You don't do anything except get a salary for free, so you can go," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The company will be better off with experienced leadership." I looked at him calmly, seeing not the business titan he imagined himself to be, but a frightened man unable to accept change or acknowledge his son's achievements. "No problem, Dad," I replied, gathering my papers. "You'll be fine." Security was waiting outside the boardroom, ready to escort me from the building. I was allowed 30 minutes to collect personal items from my office under supervision, a humiliating end to 5 years of transformative leadership. As I packed my belongings, Grace slipped into my office briefly. "This is wrong," she whispered, discreetly passing me a flash drive. "Key documents and contacts. You might need them." Outside the building, rain beginning to fall, I called Amanda. "It's done," I said simply. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. I looked back at the Harrison manufacturing headquarters, the company I had rebuilt now closed to me. "Now we wait," I replied. Dad just made the biggest mistake of his career, but he doesn't know it yet. That evening, my mother called in tears, saying she had known nothing of Dad's plan. Jessica, surprisingly, had confronted Dad at home, resulting in another family rift. The company's stock had already dropped 5% on rumors of my departure, a small taste of what was to come. I gave no interviews, made no public statements, and filed no lawsuits. I simply waited, knowing that Dad and Samuel would soon discover what happens when you remove the architect before understanding the building's design. For 2 weeks following my termination, I maintained complete silence. No industry contacts could reach me. No reporters received comments. I spent time with Amanda and Lily, catching up on the family moments I had sacrificed during years of 18-hour workdays. Meanwhile, I monitored Harrison Manufacturing's operations through my network of loyal employees. Dad and Samuel were implementing sweeping changes, replacing my innovative systems with traditional approaches that had been outdated a decade ago. They reversed several of my strategic initiatives, including an expansion into Asian markets that had been nearing completion. The company's stock continued its downward trend as industry analysts questioned the abrupt leadership change at the peak of success. Clients began expressing concerns about product consistency and future development. Exactly 15 days after my departure, I met with Martin Bennett to finalize my complete acquisition of Bennett Supply. Over the past 5 years, I had gradually increased my ownership stake, and now the transfer was complete. I was the sole owner of the company that provided 60% of Harrison Manufacturing's essential components. Are you sure about this timing? Martin asked as we signed the final paperwork. Lawrence won't take it well. Lawrence made his choice, I replied. Now he'll face the consequences. The following morning, my attorneys delivered a formal letter to Harrison Manufacturing, announcing Bennett Supply's change in ownership and requesting a meeting to discuss our ongoing business relationship. The letter was intentionally vague, giving no indication of who the new owner was. Dad, predictably, dismissed the letter as a routine business matter and delegated it to a mid-level purchasing manager. Bennett Supply's first move was subtle, a small delay in delivery of a specialized component, citing new quality control procedures. The delay was just long enough to disrupt Harrison Manufacturing's production schedule without raising major alarms. A week later, a second, more significant production issue delayed another shipment. This time, Harrison Manufacturing had to temporarily halt an entire production line, costing thousands in downtime. When the purchasing manager called Bennett Supply to escalate the issue, he was informed that the new ownership is reviewing all client relationships and that a meeting had already been requested. Dad finally took notice when the third delay affected their largest client's order. He personally called Bennett Supply, demanding to speak with the new owner. I'd be happy to meet, I told his secretary, not identifying myself. Our representatives will be at your offices tomorrow at 10 a.m. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison Manufacturing for the first time since my termination. The security guards who had escorted me out now awkwardly welcomed me as a vendor representative. I was directed to the main conference room, where Dad, Samuel, and 3 executives waited impatiently. The shock on Dad's face when I walked in was worth every second of the previous 2 weeks. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, half rising from his chair. I'm here representing Bennett Supply, I replied calmly, placing my business cards on the table. As the new owner, I wanted to personally discuss our supply arrangement. Samuel recovered first. This is clearly a conflict of interest given your former position here. There's no conflict, I countered. I'm a private businessman who owns a supply company. Harrison Manufacturing is one of my clients. It's a straightforward commercial relationship. Dad's face had transformed from shock to fury. You planned this. You knew we would be vulnerable without Bennett's components. I made a strategic acquisition. I corrected him. Just as you made a strategic decision to remove me from Harrison Manufacturing. We're both businessmen making business decisions. For the next hour, I outlined the new terms for Bennett Supply's relationship with Harrison Manufacturing. Prices would increase by 15%, delivery schedules would be adjusted to Bennett's convenience, and payment terms would shift from net 60 to net 30. This is extortion, Samuel sputtered. We'll find another supplier. You're welcome to try, I replied. But Bennett's proprietary alloys are essential for your current product lines. Reformulating would take months, cost millions in R&D, and require recertification from your major clients. Meanwhile, your production would be halted completely within 3 weeks as your current inventory depletes. I slid a contract across the table. These are the new terms, effective immediately. Bennett Supply values Harrison Manufacturing's business, but we have other interested clients if these terms aren't acceptable. Dad stared at me, a complex mixture of rage and something resembling respect flickering across his face. You'll destroy this company out of spite. No, Dad, I replied, standing to leave. I built this company, remember? I'm simply ensuring that my current business receives fair value for its essential contributions. The board meeting is in 3 days. I suggest you use that time to review these terms carefully. The emergency board meeting was chaotic. Several members who had voted for my termination now questioned Dad's judgment. Noah led the faction arguing for accepting Bennett Supply's terms while seeking alternative suppliers long-term. Samuel attempted to find legal grounds to challenge my ownership of Bennett Supply, but was shut down by the company's attorneys. Mr. Harrison acquired Bennett Supply legally through proper channels. There are no grounds for interference with a legitimate business transaction. When the final vote came, the board approved the new supply terms by a narrow margin. Dad, outvoted and outmaneuvered, sat in stunned silence as his carefully constructed plan collapsed around him. As I left the building, Noah caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was either brilliant or insane," he said. "Lawrence underestimated you completely." "He always has," I replied. "That's why we're here." The power dynamics had reversed completely. Dad had removed me from the company I had built to $500 million, but now he found himself dependent on my goodwill for its very survival. The strategic advantage I had quietly constructed over 5 years had proven more valuable than the title or position I had lost. The real question was what would happen next. This wasn't just business anymore. It was family, legacy, and the future of everything we had built. The 6 months following my strategic revelation were transformative for Harrison Manufacturing and our family. Bennett Supply's new pricing structure cut deeply into the company's profit margins. The stock price stabilized but remained well below its peak. Major clients, sensing instability, began exploring relationships with competitors. Dad aged visibly under the strain. His hair, already gray, seemed to whiten overnight. Samuel's influence diminished as board members questioned the wisdom of the coup that had precipitated the crisis. Several executives who had aligned with Dad began discreetly sending their resumes to competitors. I focused on expanding Bennett Supply, acquiring 2 smaller materials companies, and developing new proprietary alloys. I maintained professional business relations with Harrison Manufacturing, never missing a delivery or changing terms without proper notice. This wasn't about revenge. It was about demonstrating the consequences of Dad's actions. 3 months after the showdown, my mother Catherine arranged a private lunch with me. "Your father would never admit it," she said, stirring her tea absently, "but the company is struggling without you. His blood pressure is through the roof, and the doctor is concerned." "He made his choice, Mom," I replied, though not without sympathy. Dad was still my father, despite everything. "I know," she sighed. "Lawrence has always been his own worst enemy. His pride won't let him see that he needs you." A week later, Jessica called. After years of minimal involvement with the family business, she had accepted a temporary consulting position at Harrison Manufacturing to help stabilize operations. "It's worse than I thought," she told me bluntly. "Dad and Samuel have undone half your innovations. They're hemorrhaging talent. 3 board members have approached me about bringing you back." "What does Dad say about that?" I asked. "He still thinks he can find a way around Bennett Supply," Jessica replied. "But the quarterly numbers don't lie. They've posted their first loss in 10 years. I spent the next month consulting with Noah, Amanda, and other trusted advisors, developing a comprehensive proposal for Harrison Manufacturing's future. The plan was fair, focusing on the company's best interests rather than personal vindication. When Harrison Manufacturing posted a second consecutive quarterly loss, triggering loan covenant violations, the situation became critical. Banks were threatening to call in loans that could bankrupt the company within weeks. That night, my doorbell rang at 11 p.m. Dad stood on my porch, looking smaller somehow, the confident swagger replaced by evident exhaustion. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. We sat in my home office, the silence heavy between us. Finally, he spoke, eyes fixed on the floor. "The banks are calling in the loans. We'll be insolvent within 30 days, without refinancing." "I know," I replied simply. Dad looked up, a flash of the old anger returning. "Is that what you wanted? To destroy what took me 40 years to build?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I wanted to build it into something greater, which I did. You're the one who couldn't accept that." For a moment, I thought he would storm out. Instead, his shoulders slumped. "The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss bankruptcy options. Unless what, Dad? Unless you have another solution," he finished, the words clearly painful to articulate. I retrieved the folder containing my proposal and placed it on the desk between us. I've been working on this for weeks. It's a complete restructuring plan, including refinancing through my banking relationships. Dad flipped through the document, his expression unreadable. And what do you want in return? I return as CEO, I stated. You take the role of chairman, focusing on client relationships and industry presence. Bennett Supply is integrated into Harrison Manufacturing, creating a vertically integrated operation. The board is restructured to include more independent directors. You want me to step aside, Dad summarized. I want you to do what's best for the company you founded, I corrected. The company you always told me would be mine someday. Dad closed the folder and stood. I'll present it to the board tomorrow. The board's approval was unanimous, even with Dad's grudging endorsement. The press release announced a strategic reorganization that would leverage the strengths of both Harrison leaders. Financial markets responded positively, with the stock rising 15% on the news. My first day back at Harrison Manufacturing was surreal. Employees who had watched me being escorted out now welcomed me as their new CEO. Grace, who had maintained the remnants of my systems during my absence, hugged me openly in the lobby. "Welcome home," she whispered. "We've missed you." Dad was conspicuously absent from the executive floor, having relocated to a smaller office on the client relations level. When I finally saw him late that afternoon, his attempt at professional courtesy was strained but present. "The Peterson account needs attention," he said by way of greeting. "They've been threatening to reduce their order volume." "I'll review it today," I promised, respecting his attempt to establish a working relationship. Over the following weeks, I systematically reversed Samuel's changes and re-established the innovative approaches that had driven our earlier growth. Samuel himself resigned within the month, recognizing his position was untenable. The integration of Bennett Supply proceeded smoothly, creating significant operational efficiencies. Within 6 months, Harrison Manufacturing had returned to profitability. The $500 million valuation was still a target rather than a reality, but our trajectory was once again positive. Dad observed these changes from a distance, rarely offering input but no longer actively obstructing progress. His health, which had deteriorated during the crisis, gradually improved as the company stabilized. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a routine medical checkup, Dad was diagnosed with a minor heart condition. Though not immediately life-threatening, it forced him to confront his mortality and priorities. Catherine organized a family dinner the following weekend, the first time all 4 Harrisons had been together in nearly a year. The conversation was stilted initially, with Dad uncharacteristically quiet. After dinner, he asked me to join him on the back porch, the same spot where he had lectured me about business principles throughout my youth. "I've been watching what you've done with the company," he began awkwardly. "The refinancing was clever. The vertical integration is working better than I expected." Coming from Dad, this was extraordinary praise. "I learned from you," I replied honestly. "The fundamentals you taught me were sound. I just applied them to a changing market." Dad nodded, looking out at the garden rather than at me. "I couldn't see it," he admitted. "The company I built becoming something I didn't recognize. It felt like losing everything." "It wasn't about erasing your legacy, Dad. It was about building on it." He turned to me then, his eyes revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "I was wrong, Maxwell. About the company, about you. The board meeting, the accusations, it was pride. Stupid, destructive pride." The apology, incomplete but sincere, hung in the air between us. I realized that for Lawrence Harrison, this admission represented a seismic shift in his understanding of himself and his relationship with me. "We can move forward," I offered. "The company needs both of us, just in different ways." Over the next year, Harrison Manufacturing flourished under our recalibrated leadership. Dad's client relationships proved valuable, while my operational and strategic direction drove continued innovation. Our valuation climbed steadily, surpassing $750 million by the following fiscal year. The company's anniversary celebration became an opportunity for public reconciliation. Dad took the stage to thunderous applause, his position as founder still commanding immense respect. 40 years ago, I started this company with nothing but determination and a dream, he began, his voice strong despite his recent health challenges. But the greatest asset Harrison Manufacturing ever acquired wasn't a technology or a client relationship. It was my son, Maxwell. The room fell silent as Dad continued, departing entirely from his prepared remarks. I failed to recognize the brilliance of his vision, the strength of his leadership, and the depth of his commitment to our company's future. That failure nearly cost us everything. Today, I'm announcing my full retirement, confident that Harrison Manufacturing will reach heights I never imagined possible under Maxwell's leadership. As I joined him on stage, the applause was deafening. Dad embraced me publicly for the first time in memory, whispering, "You earned this. All of it." Looking back on our journey from small regional manufacturer to industry leader, from father-son conflict to reconciliation, I realized that sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what really matters. The company had nearly been destroyed by pride and inability to change, but emerged stronger through crisis and renewal. The lesson wasn't just about business strategy or succession planning. It was about recognizing that legacy isn't about preserving the past unchanged, but about building foundations strong enough to support futures we might not have imagined. What's your experience with family businesses? Have you faced similar challenges with transition and change? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might be navigating complex family business dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey of growth and reconciliation. And remember that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most meaningful transformations.